everybody. Back again. Tonight, as mentioned, we're going to study about Jonathan Edwards. I'm really going to limit it to two important things that he did. I've titled this Jonathan Edwards, America's Greatest Theologian. I bit off a little bit more than I could chew to try to do all of Jonathan Edwards in 30 minutes. So like I said, I'm going to limit it to two of the most important things that he accomplished. Edwards is considered to be the most lastingly famous preacher of his time. He's one of the most accomplished Christian authors in American history, and was a central figure in the First Great Awakening. That's one of the largest and most significant revivals in American history. Most of his writings and sermons have greatly influenced Christians around the world for nearly 3 centuries. But for our purposes tonight, I want to focus on Edwards as a theologian. I know that arguments can be made for many others to have this title as America's greatest theologian, but this is my presentation and that's my opinion. I'm not alone in it, and in the time that I have, I won't sufficiently support that claim. But I just hope that by the end of what I have to say tonight, you'll be more interested and more curious in Edwards' work, and go on to study him more yourself. If you do, you'll find profoundly deep theology in all that you read. Jonathan Edwards lived 55 years. In that time, he accomplished a whole lot as a pastor and a theologian. I've decided to just focus in on two things he accomplished that are most significant impact on Christians since his death. So those two things are some highlights from Edwards' resolutions that he wrote, and some highlights from his most famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. That's the man himself. He looks the part of a Puritan preacher. Before Jonathan Edwards became the Jonathan Edwards that we remember him, now he was an 18-year-old Yale graduate serving as an interim pastor in New York City who was trying to sort out how to live as a Christian man. His father was a preacher. His grandfather was a preacher. His uncles were preachers. New York City in 1722 was overwhelming for him. The city boasted almost 10,000 inhabitants, but that was quite a lot for a small-town New England boy. Despite his young age, Edwards was wise enough to know that a commitment to righteous character was essential to his desire to live as a godly man. Edwards began to write a list of resolutions that would guide the rest of his life. He spent a year on the project. He started shortly after his 19th birthday and penned his 70th resolution on August 17th, 1723. Edwards' resolutions offer great insight into his level of commitment to cultivate a godly character in himself. I'm going to read for you 13 resolutions that I've selected. I do encourage you to read through all 70. It was pretty painstaking to trim these down to just a few. I could have done the whole lesson just on this, but it was very profitable for me to spend time reading through them to decide which ones I wanted to bring up, and I think if any of you were to spend some time in them, it would benefit you as well. These, as I've highlighted them, they're out of order numerically. They're loosely organized topically, but I've started with the ones that I personally found most impactful. So most all of these begin with the word resolved. So I want to define that for you before we dive in. Resolved is defined as firmly determined to do something. So as I read through these and I start each one with the word resolved, in your mind, think 19-year-old man wanting to live a godly life, firmly determined to do this thing, all his life. He begins his list. Just one second, actually. Okay. He begins his list with this introduction. Being sensible that I am unable to do anything without God's help, I do humbly entreat Him by His grace to enable me to keep these resolutions, so far as they are agreeable to His will, for Christ's sake. And he has a note right there at the beginning. Remember to read over these resolutions once a week. Here we go. On the supposition that there ever was to be but one individual in the world at any one time who was properly a complete Christian, in all respects of a right stamp, having Christianity always shining in its true luster and appearing excellent and lovely from whatever part and under whatever character viewed, resolved to act just as I would do if I strove with all my might to be that one who should live in my time. Even as a young man, he was committing his life to strive to be the best ambassador for Christ that he could possibly be every day. Resolved to live with all my might while I do live. Resolved always to do that which I shall wish I had done when I see others do it. Resolved never to lose one moment of time, but improve it the most profitable way I possibly can. Resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do if it were the last hour of my life. Resolved that I will live so as I shall wish I had done when I come to die. Resolved never to do anything out of revenge. Resolved not only to refrain from an air of dislike, fretfulness, and anger in conversation, but to exhibit an air of love, cheerfulness, and benignity. Try to do that every day. Let there be something of benevolence in all I speak. Resolved, after afflictions, to inquire what I am the better for them, what good I have got by them, and what I might have got by them. Resolved to act in all respects, both speaking and doing, as if nobody had been so vile as I, and as if I had committed the same sins or had the same infirmities or failings as others, and that I will let the knowledge of their failings promote nothing but shame in myself, and prove only an occasion of my confessing my own sins and misery to God. Humility is a very important character trait in the life of a Christian. Resolved to examine carefully and constantly what that one thing in me is which causes me in the least to doubt the love of God and to direct all my forces against it. This parallels a John Owen quote many of us familiar with. Cease not a day from this work. Be killing sin, or it will be killing you. Resolved to study the Scriptures so steadily, constantly, and frequently, as that I may find and plainly perceive myself to grow in the knowledge of the same. I took my time with that. Those are the 13 that I have, that I've selected. I encourage you to read all 70. And again, they were written by Edwards when he was only 19 and were the foundation of how he would strive to live out his Christian faith. I said it on one of them, but each one of them, try to do that every day. That's how he tried to live every day. Before I get to the second portion of my presentation, I have a bit of an interlude. I wanted to include more than this, but I've included a few of my favorite quotes in some slides here. Being rich in theology, that he did so much as an author, recorded so much of his sermons. He's a very quotable person, even from his time. You contribute nothing to your salvation but the sin that made it necessary. I think we've all heard that one. God does not choose men because they are great, but makes them great because he has chosen them. This is my favorite. This world is all the hell that a true Christian is to ever endure, and it is all the heaven that unbelievers shall ever enjoy. Let that one marinate. And this one I've quoted several times. Lord, stamp eternity on my eyeballs. The idea there is that he would view everything through a lens of the eternal perspective, that he would remember in all things that what he just sees in front of him isn't the end-all be-all, and that he would have this perspective of the eternal consequences to things in everything that he does day to day. I want to give you some highlights from his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. I imagine most of you here have read it. It was tricky for me to try to figure out how to put this together because I knew I was giving a presentation to a lot of people who are very familiar with Edwards, but typically when I do an informational type thing, I try to present it as though there's somebody there who knows not a whole lot about what I'm talking about. I'm still going to go through the highlights of this. I hope even if you've read it or heard it before that it will still have an effect on you. The resolutions were very profitable for me to read through. I have listened to this sermon on YouTube a time or two. It's different to read. I don't know if any of you have ever tried both, but it had an effect on me just reading through it, trying to take my time and see what portions I wanted to highlight, just taking that approach to it. So again, I hope it has an effect on you hearing it again, even if you have. It was first preached in Enfield, Connecticut on July 7th, 1741. It's one of, if not the most famous sermon ever preached outside of what we find in the Scriptures. If you've never read it or listened to it in its entirety, please do. The sermon is an appeal to sinners to recognize that they will be judged by God and that this judgment will be more fearful and painful than they can comprehend. Three themes stand out as important for understanding Edwards' approach to the actual message that he gave. Number one is that corrupt sinners face a fearful judgment. Fact. Two, time is short for the unrepentant. God's righteous wrath will come suddenly and unexpectedly. And three, it is only God's free choice that extends the day of mercy and provides another opportunity to respond to his call. Each of these themes is made more potent by the use of vivid metaphors, which are the heart and soul of Edwards' approach. None of us were there to hear him give the sermon. I know Daryl said you wish you would have been there. His style was very not Whitefield. It was not dramatic. He would almost lull you to death if it weren't so rich in theology. He put it together, he stood up there, and he read it, and he let it do its thing. I'll probably try to be a little more animated as I read through some of it, but focus in on the words and what's actually being said. This is the key text that he used for the sermon, Deuteronomy 32:35. To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time. For the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste. So this is his introduction to the sermon. It's almost as long as our pastor's introduction, so bear with me, okay? It's an introduction and a little bit of expository preaching as well. In this verse is threatened the vengeance of God on the wicked, unbelieving Israelites who were God's visible people and who lived under the means of grace, but who, notwithstanding all God's wonderful works toward them, remained, as verse 28 points out, void of counsel, having no understanding in them. Under all the cultivations of heaven, they brought forth bitter and poisonous fruit, as in the 2 verses next preceding the text. The expression I have chosen for my text, their foot shall slide in due time, seems to imply the following things relating to the punishment and destruction to which these wicked Israelites were exposed. That they were always exposed to destruction, as one that stands or walks in slippery places is always exposed to fall. This is implied in the manner of their destruction coming upon them, being represented by their foot sliding. The same is expressed in Psalm 72:18. Surely thou didst set them in slippery places, thou cast them down into destruction. It implies that they were always exposed to sudden, unexpected destruction. As he that walks in slippery places is every moment liable to fall, he cannot foresee one moment whether he shall stand or fall the next. He cannot foresee one moment, and when he does fall, he falls at once without warning, which is also expressed in Psalm 73:18 and 19. Surely thou didst set them in slippery places, thou cast them down into destruction. How are they brought into desolation as in a moment? The third thing implied, that they are liable to fall of themselves, without being thrown down by the hand of another, as he that stands or walks on slippery ground needs nothing but his own weight to throw him down. And the fourth thing that's implied is that the reason why they are not fallen already and do not fall now is only that God's appointed time is not come. For it is said that when that due time or appointed time comes, their foot shall slide. Then they shall be left to fall, as they are inclined by their own weight. God will not hold them up in these slippery places any longer, but will let them go. And then at that very instant they shall fall into destruction. As he that stands on such slippery, declining ground, on the edge of a pit, cannot stand alone, and when he is let go, he immediately falls and is lost. The observation from the words that I now insist upon is this: there is nothing that keeps wicked men at any one moment out of hell but the mere pleasure of God. By the mere pleasure of God, I mean his sovereign pleasure, his arbitrary will, restrained by no obligation, hindered by no manner of difficulty, any more than if nothing else but God's mere will had the least degree, or in any respects whatsoever, any hand in the preservation of wicked men one moment. That was the introduction, and I wanted to skip ahead to the portion that I pulled out we talked about this right before the lesson. Edward started the sermon out talking about the Israelites. You know, it's a Deuteronomy text. We're talking about all the things that the Israelites did bad. And I can just imagine, I don't know if they did it then, but now people kind of nod along to what the pastor has to say. I can see them, yeah, those Israelites, they were just not good to God. It doesn't take him long to get to his congregation, and that his point is it applies to them just the same. Natural men's prudence and care to preserve their own lives, or the care of others to preserve them, do not secure them a moment. To this, divine providence and universal experience do also bear testimony. There is this clear evidence that men's own wisdom is no security to them from death. And if it were otherwise, we should see some difference between the wise and politic men of the world and others with regard to their liableness to early and unexpected death. But how is it in fact? Ecclesiastes 2:16, for there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever, seeing that which now is in the days to come shall be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool. All wicked men's pains and contrivance which they use to escape hell, while they continue to reject Christ, and so remain wicked men, do not secure them from hell one moment. Almost every natural man that hears of hell flatters himself that he shall escape it. He depends upon himself for his own security. He flatters himself in what he has done, in what he is now doing, and what he intends to do. Everyone lays out matters in his own mind, how he shall avoid damnation, and flatters himself that he contrives well for himself, and that his schemes will not fail. They hear indeed that there are but few saved, and that the greater part of men that have died heretofore are gone to hell. But each one imagines that he lays out matters better for his own escape than others have done. He does not intend to come to that place of torment. He says within himself that he intends to take effectual care, and to order matters so for himself as not to fail. But the foolish children of men miserably delude themselves in their own schemes and in confidence in their own strength and wisdom. They trust in nothing but a shadow. The greater part of those who heretofore have lived under the same means of grace and are now dead are undoubtedly gone to hell, and it was not because they were not as wise as those who are now alive. It was not because they did not lay out matters as well for themselves to secure their own escape. If we could speak with them and inquire of them one by one, whether they expected, when alive and when they used to hear about hell, ever to be the subjects of misery, we doubtless should hear one and another reply, "No, I never intended to come here. I had laid out matters otherwise in my mind. I thought I should contrive well for myself. I thought my scheme good. I intended to take effectual care, but it came upon me unexpected. I did not look for it at that time, and in that manner. It came as a thief. Death outwitted me. God's wrath was too quick for me. Oh, my cursed foolishness. I was flattering myself and pleasing myself with vain dreams of what I would do hereafter. And when I was saying peace and safety, then suddenly destruction came upon me." So that was the highlights that I have of the expository portion that highlights those 3 points. Corrupt sinners face a fearful judgment. Time is short for the unrepentant, and it's only God's free choice that extends the day of mercy. And I want to finish with a portion of the application. The sermon is divided into both portions. It's the application portion. And now you have an extraordinary opportunity, a day wherein Christ has thrown the door of mercy wide open and stands in calling and crying with a loud voice to poor sinners. A day wherein many are flocking to him and pressing into the kingdom of God. Many are daily coming from east, west, north, and south, many that were very lately in the same miserable condition that you are in, are now in a happy state, with their hearts filled with love to Him who has loved them and washed them from their sins in His own blood, and rejoicing in hope of the glory of God. How awful it is to be left behind at such a day, to see so many others feasting while you are pining and perishing, to see so many rejoicing and singing for joy of heart, while you have cause to mourn for sorrow of heart and howl for vexation of spirit. How can you rest one moment in such a condition? Therefore, let everyone that is out of Christ now awake and fly from the wrath to come. The wrath of Almighty God is now undoubtedly hanging over a great part of this congregation. Let every one fly out of Sodom. Haste and escape for your lives. Look not behind you. Escape to the mountain, lest you be consumed. Questions? Anybody? Ask me about Edwards, because all I got to was the theology.
What did you find most intriguing about his character?
I thought he was interesting as a young man. He was very fascinated with science in a day where that, for a lot of people, even as it does today, is a division from faith in a lot of ways. It wasn't the case for him. He saw the natural things of the world and the creation around him as men have all along, as pointing to the Creator, and he saw God's beauty in creation. He wrote several books and pamphlets and things, even as a very young man, talking about the interest that he had in science and recording things that he observed and discovered and things like that. His character, I didn't get to this. He was voted out of his church, and it wasn't long after he preached the sermon, and it was kind of an interesting matter if you get a chance to read on it. But he took over his grandfather's church, and prior to him coming there, they had voted on a particular matter of theology and doctrine that would be taught at the church. He didn't agree with it, just didn't agree with it, didn't see evidence of it, wasn't going to budge. They liked him as a preacher and let him preach for a while, but when he was pushed on it a few years after the buzz of the revival, when he was pushed on the subject, he wouldn't budge, and they voted him out. Even the greatest theologian in American history was voted out of his church over. It wasn't exactly a minor issue, but it wasn't anything major. It was something that we today would probably make an effort to not split over. They invited him back as a guest preacher from time to time, but he was voted out. You can see in some of his readings, I mean, he wrote the resolutions at 19, but they stayed with him. I really think he kept the one that said, read through these every week, because he constantly reminded himself that this is how he needed to act, this is how he needed to live as a godly man, or to follow these. It was almost like a code of conduct, really. I don't have a note on it, so he may have. I know that he was the only boy of like 12 kids. And I mentioned that the family before him, his father, his grandfather, his uncles, they were all in the ministry. His father was not very wealthy, so he didn't preach at a large church. So he actually, for extra income, tutored to prepare young men to go to college. And so Edwards, I think he entered Yale at like 11 or 12 years old because he was around that as a young man. He was tutored all the time by his father. He's very bright. That's another thing about his early life. He was very, very bright because he had committed himself to it at an early age to learn. He had a desire to learn. I know he had several children, but as far as if any of them went into ministry, I'm not sure.
Information surrounding his conversion, circumstances around his conversion.
I know it happened early, but he also went through a period where, not to the extent that Brainerd did, but where he really needed to solidify, and it was prior to the resolutions, because he went to Yale early, 11 or 12 years old, and by 17, 18 years old, he had gone to New York to fill a pulpit somewhere. So in that time, he had to kind of ground himself in what his actual faith was and how he really believed and why he believed. But the actual event, I don't have anything on it. These are better questions than I anticipated.
What ways did your study of Edwards change? Did it make any changes in your thoughts, your worldview, and do you think it would make any difference? And what kind of difference might it make in the church as we go back and read about this person from the 1700s?
So for me, if you know me well, this is gonna be hard to believe. It kind of causes me to take things more seriously. I kind of, to a fault, almost take life a little bit too seriously. But I mean, reading through the two things that I went to tonight, through those resolutions, through his sermon that I hit the highlights of, back to that quote of eternity on my eyeballs. You get caught up, and I do, in the daily grind. You know, I'm busy. I got a lot of things I'm worried about. But how important is that stuff? You know, what ought to be important to me in my day-to-day is my being an ambassador for Christ, my character. How am I living up to some of these things that he committed himself to? Am I a man amongst the people that I'm around, striving to live in the manner that he did? Am I living up to the expectations of me as a Christian man? And just the weight of that idea of a slippery slope at any moment, any one of us or any of these people that we encounter. You never know the person that you meet that you could have, would have, should have witnessed to. You don't know what happened to that person. And it is a serious matter. And as far as us as a church, I think it's good, and it really just reaffirms what I'd already thought, that we go back and look at these people, at their lives, at their works. They were a part of laying a foundation that we're still standing on now. I mean, especially these Puritans and the effect that they had on the formation of the government in the country, the formation and what lasted for a long time, the culture in the country. I mean, when we talked about, this sermon that I went through was republished and read by hundreds of thousands of people. And when we talk about all the traveling pastors, the guy that's always on horseback, they had a profound effect on the culture and the commitment to living out a Christian life in our country that was passed down for a long time. And so I think it's good to look back and remember and recognize and try to see points that we can pull from different areas of time. We talk about it, you have to understand these men as who they were in their time, but what is lasting from what they left,
So when he was voted out of his church, did he become a
he actually went and was a missionary to a group of Mohicans in New York for a little while. I think that was a little rough for him. Again, only boy in a family of like 12 kids, and he was always very well educated. He just wasn't your roughneck type, and from what I could see, it didn't suit him very well. He didn't do it very long. Then he came back and he wrote books, and like I said, even that church and other churches he visited, because he became pretty famous, at least in New England, for this sermon and the role that he played in the Great Awakening. And then he went on to be one of the founders and president of Princeton University when it was formed, and then he died shortly after that. I think it was smallpox that killed him. But he did go and right after he was voted out of the church, that was the next thing he did, was went to be a missionary to a group of the Mohicans. I don't know if it was the last of the Mohicans or not, but it was a group of. Anybody else? Okay. That's all I have. I'm over time, but it's better than being under time. All right. Wayne, would you close us in prayer?
Country that we looked at from a few hundred years ago. And I do pray that what we have learned and thought about and been reminded of, that it will spur us to righteousness and our nation as well. And certainly that the homes and the community and the church in which we're all involved